Right, good morning, everybody. My name is Craig Schwabe. I'll be hosting the webinar that Bob is going to be giving today. Bob will be presenting on Township Megatrends, looking at trends associated with townships in our country and some of the research that is being done and the importance of looking at townships post-COVID-19 period. So just to tell you a little bit about Bob. Bob is an economist by training from my alma mater, which was the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and he spent most of his years in the advertising industry, working in a number of countries in North America, Europe, in Africa. And since then, Bob has worked extensively in the financial inclusion sector in many African countries and in Asia, as well as looking at the utilization of information for development purposes. And now more recently, looking at the development of a township potential atlas, which Bob will tell you a lot more about. So I'm going to hand over to him. But before I do, just to introduce another member of our team, Steve Johnson from Frontline Market Research, who we work very closely with, not only in South Africa, but also in African countries. And why Steve is such a critical part of this team is that they conduct retail censuses in many African countries and in South Africa. So there is an extensive amount of information available on retail points across all the townships in South Africa, which is a very critical aspect in looking at route to market analysis and other forms of analysis. So I'm going to just now hand over to Bob so he can load his presentation.
Thanks very much for that introduction, Craig. Good morning, everybody, and thanks very much indeed for joining us today. I am going to take you through data that we have and a lot of trends that we have, and particularly looking at what is affecting people in the townships. And the audience today is fairly broad, so I'm going to stick to generalities in most cases because I don't want to get specific into any particular industry. Highlight here the patterns and pathways that exist in terms of how we approach the various challenges that people in the townships are facing, and look at the trends and look at things that are happening around us, and to see to what extent we can use our data and our data sets to assist in bringing about change in lives of people and also developing policy that people can develop and move forward with. Just looking at some of the mega trends that we're probably all aware of, but I haven't looked at in detail. Unemployment and poverty are, of course, post-pandemic and during pandemic, the two most pressing challenges that we have. Between February and June, the poor were 10 times more likely to lose their jobs than the rich. Now that's the findings out of the recent NIBS Wave 3. And it's startling to think that most of our township dwellers are in that category and that so many people have fallen into the poverty trap. In fact, the number of grants issued between 2009 and 2019, the grants grew by 4 million, from about 14 million to about 18 million recipients. It took 10 years to achieve that. What happened in the last 4 months, and this is borne out by statistics from the NIDS CRAM survey, Wave 2, and also from stats by the Social Security Agency. Social Security Agency says that grants increased by 4.4 million. So what took 10 years to happen, happened in 4 months during pandemic. It's therefore, I think, pretty clear that the 350 additional grant that has been granted by the government and may need to become a permanent fixture. Employment losses, it's frightening to see that from the NIDS survey, laborers twice as likely to lose their jobs as those with tertiary education. So again, it appears that the bottom end of the pyramid is where the the brunt of everything is really being borne in South Africa. And this is resulting in a decline for demand in goods and services, and of course, household expenditure. Added to that, crime, as we all know, is fairly rampant, but we are sometimes unaware of the extent to which crime happens in the townships. We've all experienced disrupted supply chains, disrupted service delivery. We know that there's a lot of financial sustainability threats, urbanization and migration, and quite disturbingly, the recent draft bill by the Gauteng government that think to ban foreigners from doing business in the townships is quite a disturbing aspect of life post-pandemic. What is very interesting to a lot of manufacturers is that imminently the MAP survey will become available with the most recent consumer data. The MAP survey is the replacement for the AMP survey, and Africascope will be spatially locating that data, and that data set will be available in months to come. And from that too, we will look at the changing lifestyles and see what's happening. So how do we react to these trends? What we say is we need to move the megatrends to your individual microtrend. So be you in the supply, the logistics or distribution business, if you're in economic development or poverty reduction, education and health or government services, you all need information at a very granular level to be able to understand the challenges and to be able to develop policies and strategies to overcome these. And geospatial data, for those of you that have used it and those of you who haven't used it, need to take that venture down the path, because no matter what the challenge, if we understand the issues at a micro level, we have a far better opportunity to develop policies and strategies in a more meaningful manner. The townships faced probably a double whammy. They had the pandemic and they're having failing municipalities around them. Just to put it in perspective and to help us to guide us to what we might see in this country, the World Bank did a study in the United States. 8 weeks of lockdown. What they found, businesses were rapidly running out of cash. Now, half the small firms, and they classify small firms to be fewer than 500 employees. I mean, in South African terms, that's big. These small firms in the United States had cash reserves of less than 1 month. Another $250 million of the businesses would run out of cash within 2 months. The service industries was even shorter. Restaurants, they found, had less than 1 month cash in hand. Now, that's quite concerning. Looking at in a little bit further depth, the World Bank Enterprise Survey, which is currently being conducted in 12 countries, Europe, Africa, and Kenya was involved, and South America. They surveyed 6,300 firms, and this was a random stratified sample. Of course, it's 5 employees plus. That's far greater in size than the firms we see in that pic next to the graph. And they looked at what would happen to firms that had no revenue for 8 weeks. Now, we are currently conducting that survey, as Craig said, in South Africa for the World Bank, and we should have results by the end of November. They looked at the fixed costs of firms, and based on that, they understand retailers would have about 8 weeks of survival time based on their fixed cost. Other services about 9, construction 10, and so on. So what we're seeing is probably the manufacturing, and we need to look at the detail as to what is entailed in that. But we see how fragile businesses are as a result of the pandemic and the impact on all of these. Coming closer to home, we've just had the employment figures released, and we've seen a 2.2 million decrease in employment. And we look at the sectors and we see the impact that it's going to have on particularly the townships. Private households lost about 300,000 jobs. Community and social services, about 500,000. In the finance sector, 280,000. Transport, 100,000. Trade, construction. And remember that construction said that they could last for about 10 weeks in the United States, across Europe, without funding. Utilities, and obviously that was an essential service. So utilities were fortunate enough, if you were working in the utilities, not relatively few people lost their jobs. In manufacturing, the other whammy that townships are facing is that municipalities should be supplying the infrastructure and the conducive environment to township development and township businesses, particularly. Prof. Kameri from Wits Business School, his hypothesis is that the municipalities in South Africa are facing a perfect storm. We see declining rate bases as a result of unemployment, as a result of businesses collapsing, and so on. There has been a lot of inefficiency and corruption, we know that. And unfortunately, only 21 municipalities in South Africa received clean audits in 2018 and 2019. We also know that it's been documented that about 30 trillion has been lost in fraud, and unauthorized expenditure amounting to 11 billion. That's a lot of money that could go to developing other services and infrastructure in the townships. Added to that is crime. And AfricaScope has been, since 2004, been tracking crime at a police station level. And we have about 25 crime types, and the statistics are now available on our website. We produced the website to enable people to access crime data at a very local level and to get to understand the patterns of where crimes are happening. So out of the 25 crime types in the townships, we can look and see what sort of crimes are happening, where and what can be done, and develop strategies to see what can be done to alleviate these. So getting to our Township Atlas, our vision was to provide the most comprehensive single source database, geospatial database. And when we talk about geospatial databases, the beauty of it is like the pile of stones there. The information, the data is layered one upon the other. So you might layer of demographics, and over and above that, you can input your schools or your retail outlets, whatever information you have, you layer it one upon the other, and you can get a more comprehensive and full understanding of what we're seeing in the data. And was to take these data sets and put them onto a web-based platform so that we could make the data widely available and allow individual users to input their own data to that as well. The atlas itself gives us a holistic view of the 532 major townships across the country. And the map on the left shows you where the African townships are, colored townships, and Indian townships. It's interesting to note that the townships in square kilometers amount to 4,200 square kilometers. Just to put that in perspective, that is larger than the greater Johannesburg and Durban municipalities combined. They are only 3,900 square kilometers. So it's taking up a chunk of the country, and there's a lot of people involved in that. So once we know where these townships are, we can identify which townships we would like to operate in, which townships need the most help, when, and develop specific socio-economic policies for service delivery, for example, economic development plans, and private sector and market development. In terms of township demographics, total population of 21 million people, nearly 22 million people. It's about the same split in terms of gender. And in terms of the race groups, 18.8 million are Black Africans, 2.2 million coloreds are living in townships, Indians about 600,000. And not many people would realize that there's just under 50,000 white people living in townships of South Africa. Across the provinces, Gauteng obviously has the greatest concentration with 8.8 million population, and followed by the Western Cape and KZN. Where are the townships where our greatest target market is sitting, and how do we possibly reach these? Not surprisingly, the Western Cape, for example, has the highest population of the colored population. KZN, on the other hand, has the Asian population focused there, but also in Gauteng. And the greatest concentration of whites in townships is in the Western Cape. The age groups, and we have age groups by each individual township, follow the bell curve of the national age. And what is available then in each of the townships enables you to target your markets according to whatever you're looking at. Now, a lot of people, or a lot of marketers tend to poo-poo the LSM, but we've worked with LSMs for many, many years. We've taken the LSM down to a census enumeration area to allow us to be able to analyze the data over time. And it's probably the most robust data set that's available over time to track poverty and wealth and to understand the lifestyles over time. Eskom, for example, still uses LSMs by law. They need to understand and to provide certification services on the basis of the LSM. It is also a very good poverty indicator. A number of years ago, we did a study with the Human Sciences Research Council, and we correlated the poverty index against LSMs, and the correlation is absolute. So LSMs have been around for many years, allow a lot of tracking and trends that we can understand where the townships are going. Where's this township moving in terms of LSM, and what do we want to do with that information? So the data sets that we set out to amalgamate into our atlas were obviously the boundaries, the official boundaries. Where are the informal settlements, industrial areas, business areas? Then we have the primary data sets, which are demographics, land use, facilities, income, education, employment, quality of life, and also the crime. Then we have secondary data, what we call secondary data sets, which looks at service provision, such as schools, universities, the TVET colleges, the youth development agencies, shopping centers, education levels, financial inclusion, consumer profiles, and segmenting the businesses of the townships by what we call the business sophistication measure, which I'll talk about a bit later. Then tertiary data is the government facilities, youth centers, sports facilities, NGOs, the histories of the townships, and of course our data partners are frontline with the retail outlets, which Steve will talk about shortly. So understanding of what we're setting out to achieve with our atlas is we've got the data layers for each of the 532 townships. So if we took Mamelodi, for example, we have the boundaries of the township. We can identify where each and every one of these 500 townships are, as I showed on the map earlier on. Then we have what we call point layer. So we would have ATMs and banks and schools and high schools, shopping centers, police stations, hospitals, taxi ranks, you name it. All the point information has been gathered into the data set. In certain township areas, for example, Soweto, all the strategic points of interest are also included into the data set. Then we have the polygon layers, which are the model layers, where we take the information and model it and map it. And there we have the boundaries, we have the informal settlements, commercial and agricultural areas, the demographics, land use, income, employment. So a wide range of information that can be overlaid on top of the point data. So if we're wanting to understand retail outlets in relation to LSM or education or to financial well-being or to demographics, it can be done, and you can make comparisons can be made. And in addition to that, the last layer we have is the line, what we call the line layers, which are the taxi routes, the bus routes, railway lines, etc. So we're able to understand the access to townships and what that is, what that entails. In terms of demographics, and we do say 2019, 2020 demographics, we work very closely with Prof. Louis van Tonder, who was with Stats SA, updating the statistics of the country every year. And we update the demographics of South Africa at the census enumeration level every single year. So instead of relying on the 2011 census, which is by now way out of date, we have up-to-date demographics, and we're looking at population size and densities, number of households, dependency ratios, child-headed households, youth population. So basically understanding at a very granular level within the townships a whole lot of information about the people. Then it comes to housing. We have the number of households, residential, commercial, and industrial building plans, which we pull from Stats SA's data, electricity and water connections, sanitation, and so on and so forth, including mobile penetration and internet penetration. Also importantly, to understand the backyard shacks. Look at the growth rates of backyard shacks, the location of them, the difference between backyard shacks and informal settlements. And then in some cases, we've done research where we look at the motivations for living in backyard shacks. Mentions of accommodation at reasonable rates, or being part of a community, having access to services that they wouldn't necessarily have in an informal area, and access to transport to get to places of work. We also cover economic activity, that's incomes, economically active population, financial inclusion, employment, skills development, and a whole lot of critical information about understanding the viability of people and businesses in the townships. So if you were to look at a use case, for example, as to which townships would be best for my post-COVID activities. So first of all, you'd want to look at your target market. Who am I talking to? Who do I really want to aim my activities at? Check if there's any government information. And sadly, the detailed and local information from the government side in terms of COVID-19 has been very sparse, and in most cases, very difficult to get our hands on in order to map and model the data at a local level. But you would also want to look at, for example, economic activity. You might be wanting to understand the landscape of the retail trade in the township. What are the access to services? CSI projects that are being engaged in the township. So these could be mapped, and individual CSI project mapped against and positioned against other providers of projects. Naturally, the consumer behavior and shopping habits, that will come out of consumer data sets. Housing and structures, if we want to look at ways in which we can improve the housing of people in the townships, also to understand the construction of the various households and construction materials used, education facilities, and even sporting facilities, to look at and to say, these are the areas that I want to become involved in. If I want my brand to be associated, for example, with football or with rugby or with tennis or whatever it is, we can understand what facilities are available and what needs to be done and can be done to develop that. I'm going to now hand over to Steve Johnson from Frontline to talk very quickly about the retail data set that Frontline has available at a township level. Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Hello, everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces from the last webinar and obviously in our professional circles. Yeah, so today I think I'm just going to dovetail with what Bob has been saying about the Africa Scope data and how layers can make data a real asset to various businesses across sectors. So what I'm going to show you today is a little bit, Bob, you'll just have to help me with, obviously, presenting, so I'll let you know when we need to move on, is Frontline went about walking across the most of South Africa and the major regions to pick up all retail FMCG outlets, fast-moving consumer good outlets. And that meant to go to every outlet door to door with foot soldiers, which we had about 285 of them walking the streets over a 7-month period in order to pick up 150,000 retail outlets from bottom end all the way to the top end modern trade. So it's not the entire country, it's the focus centers of the major metropolitan areas and some key areas that our said client wanted. So there is more data to be available out there by walking the streets. So just to give you a summary and then to talk to Township specifically. So just from a positioning of a bird's eye point of view, that is basically the areas that we covered across South Africa, across the different provinces that we have in our beautiful country. So you can see it's a large volume and a large geographical volume of the country, but as you know, our country is very vast. So there is even more opportunities out there to pick up more outlets. So basically, just as a summary, it started in October from a setup point of view and it ended in April 2019. So the data in real terms is very fresh considering a retail census data set. Obviously, we've had COVID and there is an assumption that the market has changed somewhat. But there's some interesting insights from the audit that we just did in the last 3 weeks that we only had a 6% on 1,000 outlets. We only had about 6% attrition rate or hit rate miss on outlets that were not open. So there has been movement, but not as much as we thought there would be. However, that being said, you have to have data from a starting point. So depending on who's listening in and what you want to use data for, this data will speak to you differently. However, if you consider all the data sets that Bob went through and you add these as a layer, you're talking about a very powerful data set, as what we like to call it, data as an asset. But data is only an asset if you can convert it into a real reporting system whereby you can actually action that data and put insights into action. And that's where the combination of Africa Scope and Frontline come together as a powerhouse to be able to dissect data down to the most granular levels to take it to market. And obviously, everyone knows that on top of mind across the world, one of the only places to grow at the moment is Africa. Obviously, South Africa is one of those countries. But the rest of Africa, there's massive growth, and that is where people are looking for growth opportunities. And we want to be in that position to offer that lens into Africa, right down to the granular levels to benefit their business, to grow it smartly across Africa, because that's very important. So just in summary, if you look at this will become available. But basically, this is what it is. It's 9 provinces. We did 46 districts. There were 150 local municipalities. You saw Bob talk about 500 odd townships. Of those 500, we read 318 townships. Interestingly, 73,000 outlets were found out of the 150 within those township boundaries. So where do you want to go fish? Well, it's easy. The answer is right there on this page, and it says, go to those 318 townships, which are densely populated, and you will find over 73,000 outlets moving goods through the market from top end to bottom end. In the arrow next to it, just to give you an idea, the first 90% of outlets are made up of house shops, kiosks, specialized type stores, which, by the way, are hairdressers. One of the biggest channels that came out of the census was hairdressers in townships, and fast food takeaways, very similar to house shops, but they're doing a lot of fast food and takeaway type stores, and taverns and tabletops. So very natural that would be the case. But those are the channels in the segmentation and behavior of outlets in these areas. And if you look at the different channels, we have about 34 trade channel segments that we can break it down to a sub-trade channel level. And we can also find out that within that data, we're able to find out things like owner nationality and store sophistication, what assets they're carrying, and a few other aspects as well to be able to segment that and characterize outlets to fit your business, whatever that might be, across the whole of South Africa. We've got another 450,000 odd outlet points across Africa, across 18 countries as well, that kind of look in the same similar vein and can be used in the same way and in the same format that Bob was talking about. So once you've got this, you've got the world in your hands, or the township in your hands, to take advantage of it. So yeah, that is why we think data is an asset. The desire here, of course, is to increase this number and to update it on an ongoing basis through a rolling system that we will be presenting to the world. And together with AfriScope, we plan to roll out a constant census that will constantly feed companies real-time data across the retail and business sector of MSMEs. So look out for that. That's going to be very exciting when we launch that. So what I also mentioned is, in some of these stores that we were allowed to do or needed to do from a methodology point of view, we could break out what we call the omnibus questions that were added to the census, so that we could get an insight of what is in that store, what are they stocking, and obviously by channel, by province, by area. So you can see that in the areas that we covered, in the focused areas that we covered, the alcoholic beverages availability was over nearly 50,000. The non-alcoholic was basically the whole channel, the whole outlet base. Airtime, baby, baking, dairy, and so forth and so on. So those are all the categories that we observed in the store at availability at the time of visit. So these numbers are a great start to understand the size of the market, the size of opportunity, and compare it to what you think it is or where you think you should go. And you would find, in our experience, shows us that clients are always gobsmacked by the number of outlets that we find and what they're stocking, because we walk the streets basically, and the purpose of this walking the streets is to bring back the real number. So obviously this is a partial census or a focus census. I would assume in FMCG, considering our geographical coverage and the distances that need to be traveled, there will be anything between 280 to 320,000 outlets in South Africa selling these kind of products in the FMCG space. So that's the size of this market, which is rather large. So that is basically what you can use the census data for. And obviously, if you juxtapose this on the layers that Bob and Craig have, you can think that you can correlate this data, triangulate this data to make really good informed business decisions. And of course, improve your route to market and optimize your sales teams across these territories of South Africa, which are very complex.
Thanks, Steve. From there, we take these data we've captured and put it onto our web portal. So an example of the Tembisa outlet data, you can go onto the web portal, you can understand where the various outlets are. If you're looking for bottle stores, or you're looking for spice shops, or you're looking for nightclubs, all classified, all concentrated, and that is across all the areas that Steve showed you in his previous map. So it's web-based technology which provides tools to visualize the data. We've also designed it so that it's simple to navigate, so that even I am able to navigate around the web portal and do analysis of the data. And as Steve was saying, it allows you to have the point data, and we're able to overlay other demographic or whatever data we're looking for there. Importantly, as Steve mentioned, we are looking to expand the project and to include not just retail, but to look at manufacturing and other sectors. And that is very important development. And as Steve said, watch this space. We took the data and Craig did some analysis of it to, for example, to get heat maps of where the outlets are. And the map on the left shows that very, very clearly. Now, this could be done for outlets, it could be done for household type, it could be done for demographics, it could be done whatever you're looking for. The technology exists for us to produce similar sorts of maps. You may want to take survey data and produce exactly that. And because we're always looking at innovative ways and to look deeper into data to get an understanding of what is happening, we looked at the SESC survey from Stats SA. That's the Employers and Self-Employed survey. Craig did some point thematic mapping. In other words, to take the survey data, to analyze it at a point level, and to look at the results. Now, if you can see my pointer on the screen, we see concentrations of businesses here and here. And then we look at those businesses that have turnover of less than, or have a profit of less than 400 Rand a month. And then what is evident is they seem to correlate a lot with the concentrations of businesses. So by overlaying various different data sets, you can just visually see how we are getting a deeper understanding of why things are happening, and to look at what sort of variables are impacting on how businesses and individuals, or whatever the case may be, are growing. We've also taken the businesses, and instead of having the standard classification for businesses in South Africa, which is usually based on turnover and number of people, we find that unhelpful, because the small business is classified as up to 10 million. That in South African terms is hardly a small business. We would like to turn it on its head, and we used the FinScope National MSME Survey to look at the variables that would give us continuum, the LSM of business, of small business, if you want. So we could understand a continuum of business from those that are very unsophisticated to those that are more sophisticated. This enables policymakers then and focus on where they should be fishing. So, for example, we looked at Prof. Mike Miller from Wits University did the analysis for us, and from the data set, he took variables that were positive variables, so to speak. Have electricity, have a mobile phone, needed more than 1,000 Rand to start the business. Customers come through references, saw an opportunity, services and functions, they do accounting, and they've got bookkeeping, they've got running water. And the negative side, to detract from their position on the BSM scale, would be things like they don't own any assets. They turn to friends and family for emergency money. They seek business advice from others. They don't go to business development services, for example. They borrowed money to start the business. They don't have any membership of any organization. So what we did was to create a large number of variables that would give us a far better fix and handle on the sophistication of any particular businesses. Because for a long time, we've understood that not all small businesses owners are entrepreneurs. You know, I see so many times the one-size-fits-all strategy. From what we found in our work, survivalist businesses are those that have said, well, I got fired or I lost my job, and post-pandemic we might find a lot of this. I couldn't get a job anywhere else. I have to support my family. Are not really entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are those guys who said, I want to try out a business. I believe I can make more money. I saw an opportunity. So there's motivational issues also behind understanding of business and business environment to get away from a one-size-fits-all to businesses. For those of you who attended Steve's webinar, if you look at the mishmash of routes to market that exist within township organizations, is very difficult to get your handle on, and very difficult for service providers and distribution networks to understand where and how best to reach retailers. As Steve was pointing out, that the majority of these small township businesses have about 5 to 15 different routes to market, also with multiple financial access possibilities and multiple location possibilities. And what you saw from that cluster of the map that I showed you of the cluster of businesses in Tembisa, we find that the concentrations are so dramatically vast. And what we've been looking at is to say, we need to look at ways in which we can create networks and look at the networks and retail service outlets and optimize these. So you might be looking at, for example, where would I have a distribution point? Where's best to put distribution to a particular township? We need to identify the prime sites. We need to look at how we would reach the retail network from that. And that comes from understanding the characteristics of the trade area. It applies equally to services. So, for example, that guidelines on the left of the slide was a project we did with DPSA to optimize service delivery for government departments. Optimize the location of police stations, clinics, hospitals, schools, universities, etc. So retail optimization is as applicable to service delivery as it is to retail operations. And then where location is everything, you need to understand the best location that I should position my business in and what I should be doing with it. What is the target market I'm going to get, and how best do I serve that particular target market? So retail optimization, network optimization, a critical part is the foundational data that underlies the actual physical points. And talking about that, we have also more than 1,500 shopping malls mapped across the country. And associated with it on the map on the left with the yellow boundary there shows the trade area of KG Mall, for example. So we've got the trade area and the demographics within that, the GLA of the township, the number of shops within the malls, the foot traffic, if it's available from the owners. And we put together a comprehensive portal of shopping centers in South Africa. Just to bear out what we've been saying in terms of location and the opportunities that exist within townships. Exemplar recently listed a company on the stock exchange. It used to be wholly owned by the McCormick family. They've focused very much on township and rural development for their shopping centers, as the map below shows. And that understanding has developed a significant business for them. And just by looking at the opportunities in these areas, we can see that we don't necessarily need to be in Sandton or downtown Johannesburg to be able to make a profit out of what we're doing. You know, another feature that we have available is we've taken the media footprints. We've looked at the distribution of newspapers, mapped the local newspaper footprints, and we've also taken the Centec signal services for radios and overlaid those so that we have an understanding at a local level of the information, for example, demographics or income or LSM or whatever. This enables media houses, ad agencies, and in-house guys to look at how do I get my message across, how can I move? And also for policymakers to wanting to change policy and wanting to inform people, look at the best media available by looking at the very tight footprint. So in conclusion, the atlas is valuable for a number of reasons. And we look at the development of route to market strategies, more informed policies, as we've talked about, a wide range of action via our data portal. And we think that the data portal now is becoming more and more important as we go forward and as businesses want to get a more in-depth and easy to understand and easy to reach distribution of information. Looking at the development of sustainable business plans and also developing partnerships between public and private sector. There's a lot of talk in government circles at the moment of the need to develop these public-private partnerships. But again, without the information, there's no way that we can achieve these rapidly. So the information, underlying information becomes critical. Also to develop norms and standards for the location of facilities, such as, the TVET colleges. We understand the need for skills and developing skills within the townships, and the TVET colleges play an important role, but many of them are not optimally located and need to develop a set of norms and standards, as we did with the DPSA in terms of police stations and schools. Mapping of CSI project. We so often see that many large companies are concentrating their CSI projects all within the one particular region because that's the only one they know. By using this kind of data, they can look at different townships and different areas that need projects. And of course, being able to map your projects and to understand the viability and sustainability of the projects, and to map and to track the marketing opportunities and activities that you're undertaking. Thank you very much indeed for listening.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Steve, for your input. And I'm sure a lot of people have been given a lot of things to think about, a lot of information available in terms of townships.